from 5 goals to selection in 2019. In this room, SG304, we have Team England as our proposition. And Team Estonia as our opposition. My name is George, I'm trying to chair for us. Judge with me together. Gavin from Kazakhstan. And Laila from Pakistan. The housekeeping issues in I'll be using my phone to time, and your indications 1 minute, 7 minutes, 8 minutes will be written down by phone. Without further ado, I'll mention that in post-conflict societies, this allows grant amnesty to perpetrators of crimes rather than seeking prosecutions. Now, in that first proposition speaker, Sally Beck, there.
A couple of weeks after the Rwandan genocide, the jails of Kigali were filthy, packed to the brim with victims and perpetrators alike. But the Rwandan government realized that this was wrong. They chose to release these people and seek a new way. They sought reconciliation instead. Now Rwanda is safe, they have reconciled, and the nation is booming. On Estonia's side of the house, 80% of the population would be in jail. What do we on Proposition want to do? 2 things. Firstly, we support alternative reconciliation processes, such as the Gakaka courts in Rwanda or the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. Crucially, the focus of Proposition is not retribution, but rather truth and healing. Secondly, what we do not support is prosecution in either the domestic or international criminal justice system. But I'm going to be answering 3 key questions. Firstly, why the prosecution route is bad. Secondly, why it harms our route to get reconciliation. My second speaker will answer the third question, why amnesty specifically decrease conflict. A couple of clarifications before that. Firstly, when is a state a post-conflict state? The first thing to note here is that there has been a conflict, often along political or ethnic lines confined within that state, usually involving 2 or more directly antagonistic groups. See the Rwandan genocide of the Hutus and the Tutsis, or the Yugoslav wars. Secondly, the tensions from the conflict are usually still pertinent in political systems and daily interactions. But finally, often huge proportions of the population were involved in the conflict as perpetrators, victims, or in many situations, both at the same time. The lines are blurred. What do we want? We win this debate if we prove that this amnesty allows these states, in the majority of circumstances, to more easily and quickly move towards a trend of peace. The best way to save lives, the best way to help society rebuild. What is the purpose of a prosecution? We believe the purpose of a prosecution is to do social good. Why is this the case? No thanks. We believe that there is absolutely no intrinsic value to the word prosecuted in and of itself. Rather, legal systems have been set up to help society to function. Therefore, prosecutions and justice systems are only useful when they provide a social good. That is what this debate comes down to. We on Team England tell you that that social good is best fulfilled when the best reconciliation occurs. We will win on that metric. Let's answer this first question. Why is the prosecution route bad? We think that generally there are 2 types of post-conflict society. Firstly, ones without the civic or state infrastructure to conduct these mass trials in a timely fashion. But secondly, ones which immediately seek to prosecute. Let's examine that first type. No, thank you. The ones without the civic or state infrastructure to conduct these mass trials. We think that these states are characterized by long waits after conflict, or between the conflict and the trial, to the extent that these trials actually become historic. They're dealing with historic events. See the situation in Kosovo or Bosnia, where it is only in 2019 that we are getting any sort of conviction for things which happened 30 years ago. These are the majority of instances, and also Ops' worst case scenario. So it's really important to note that in their best case scenario, they are dealing with a minority of circumstances where you get a swift and immediate retribution. Here, why is it so hard to get prosecutions in the majority of instances then? Firstly, because there are long waits between the conflict and between the trial. Because the info is not as fresh, because it can't be as verified, because there are more time for perpetrators to die, or for victims to die, or for cover-up to occur. This is exactly what we saw in Cambodia. But secondly, you necessarily have to reignite the trauma of victims, as the international court did when they allowed separate agents to go and torture victims in Cambodia. retributive truth. But thirdly, the trial process often in and of itself reignites tension for these victims. Imagine spending decades having built your life up after what had happened to you and being thrown and being constantly questioned on what had happened just because somebody wants retribution. We tell you that retribution is yours and it comes from reconciliation. Before I explain to you the impacts of this, yes.
Are you not going to prosecute anybody no matter the damage that they did in this conflict?
Look, we think that ultimately we would not do that because we think that ultimately the most important thing is reconciliation. What Estonia uniquely have to prove to you is that there are benefits of that prosecution, not morally grandstanding, because reconciliation is the biggest moral imperative here. So, but note that some of these nations often have to seek the ICC's help because they themselves lack the infrastructure to conduct these trials. That means that regardless of whether they get prosecutions or not on their side of the house, you get less acceptance of the result from the citizens of that nation because of the concept that the ICC is a European imperialist and neo-colonial institution. So, for example, that is the reason that when Charles Taylor, by the way, the only conviction the ICC has ever managed, was successfully convicted, people in Liberia, victims and perpetrators alike, did not accept the result. His wife came second in the presidential elections and she is running again, and she uniquely ran on a platform telling individuals that Charles Taylor was unfairly prosecuted. That is what happens on their side of the house. What are the impacts of this? Firstly, you reignite tensions for no actual inherent benefit of prosecution. Secondly, you increase victim trauma. Finally, you waste the limited resources of these countries, which they should be using, no thank you, to rebuild their civic infrastructure. But finally, you get a fundamental lack of cooperation and unwillingness to give up information for these trials. Let's examine these second types of states. The states in their best case minority scenario where immediate action will be taken. Often this is done because everyone was involved in the conflict, because civilian and perpetrator lines are blurred. So the first thing to note here is that there are structural reasons why high-level individuals, people like generals, people like dictators, will not get prosecuted. Firstly, because they can escape. Secondly, because they often order actions like war crimes, but don't directly commit them themselves. But thirdly, because they are able to cover up and intimidate witnesses. Therefore, these states will necessarily go after ordinary people en masse to be seen as impactful. Because when you can't go after one big guy, you go after 18,000 little guys, as in Rwanda the government initially declared when they arrested 18,000 Tutsis. But they crucially only go after groups who lose out on the conflict. And we think this is even more politically harmful. For example, note the instance of Sierra Leone, where 37% of 24 to 30-year-olds were child soldiers. 42% of 24 to 50-year-olds were killed or maimed somebody else. Are they going to prosecute all of those people? Because if they are, they've just conceded this debate. They ruin integration, they ruin the ability of populations to heal. They break families up when the lines are blurred. They harm the reconciliation process. But finally, why does this harm their ability to get reconciliation and thus get that general movement towards peace, which is so important in this debate? 3 reasons. Firstly, because it increases animosity, even regardless of whether the prosecution is successful or fails. We think it is that animosity between groups which happens when lawyers probe into information in a very biased way, which means that the stakes are higher, it means that people get riled up, it increases the likelihood of conflict. Secondly, it makes people less willing to divulge information for fear of being prosecuted. For example, in Bosnia, the location of mass graves of murdered children largely remains unknown because people are afraid that if they tell people, they will themselves be convicted for being a part of that. Compare that to their best case scenario of retribution. I think it's far more important for somebody that they find the grave of their dead child than that they get some abstract prosecution. But finally, this is necessarily mutually exclusive to other forms of reconciliation, because on their side, they cannot simultaneously argue that they go after people through prosecution, but simultaneously that people buy into reconciliation processes. Reconciliation is the most important thing in this debate. We win on that today.
conflict science is going to be difficult. We agree that there is not going to be all the information available and it's going to cause some sort of tensions. However, we believe that this is essential in order to guarantee stability, to prevent the conflicts further in these post-conflict societies, and secondly, if a new conflict should occur, as is happening in multiple cases, then this conflict will become less violent. So firstly, in my speech, I'm going to look at the characterization and arguments that science position brought into this debate, and then secondly, talking about my two arguments. Firstly, about why we have the justice and why we have justice on our side and the right to convict these people, and then secondly, why it ensures more stability and most importantly will prevent conflicts and make it less violent in the future. Our second speaker will then tell you how it increases the vigilante justice when amnesty is created for everybody and the tensions are remained unsolved. So with a piece of framing, we agree with most of the examples. We agree with the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, for example, about the framing in South Africa. However, it is not as they showed you. This Truth and Reconciliation committee actually committed people that committed atrocities during the apartheid and upheld this system. We also support convicting people and punishing them for example, if they killed their black skinned persons like slaves. And this is something that we also support, and we believe that less people should be given amnesty automatically, more should be held under trial, right? We also support convicting people during Serbian, during Yugoslavian genocides, where generals were looked into their cases and see whether they did something wrong. There should be a proper trial investigating and looking into these issues. Notice that these trials are going to exist on the side proposition. So we're mainly talking about civilian to civilian or soldier to civilian cases because most of them are interstate conflicts. And why the state can make a legitimate decision? Why it is true that in most cases the states are going to opt for not going to make bad decisions, not torturing people or not upholding some sort of conflict and making a witch hunt on these perpetrators? Well, because the states, no matter how democratic they are, they want peace, they want stability, and they want rule. This means that they're going to imprison probably some people who did some crime, but they're not going to engage in active conflict anymore, so it's going to be resolved. We are not for absolute democracy, clearly it's unachievable, but we're here for stability, and this is what we've proven under our side. We disagree with their characterization that 80% of the people of population in post-conflict societies are going to be imprisoned. Firstly, we believe that they never proved why in most cases most of the people in these states engaged in violence and why they did war crimes. We don't believe that this is necessarily the case. Probably most of them were civilians and didn't rape people or go around murdering people. And secondly, we believe that similarly, these people who were forced to kill somebody and then killed someone, they brought the examples, then if they had no choice and did this out of self-defense, then probably they won't be persecuted to such a large extent because it was legitimate self-defense, as will be proved during the trial, right? So now they also so now starting on with the justification point about why we have the right to proper trials. Firstly, why this is implicit and why these actions always should have some kind of punishment, right? Because worse circumstances don't free you of your criminal guilt. Even in the toughest of situations, individuals have some sort of choice. It is not different during war crimes, because firstly, there are the cases where a deliberate and out-of-choice done war crimes, such as rape, where you clearly have the choice not to do it, or for example, during Sudanese protests, you can simply not go out and kill non-violent, unarmed protesters. You can simply pretend you're sick, for example, and not do those things. And secondly, there are also the cases where you do it out of self-protection, but as I already said, it's the best case where even if you do it out of self-protection, then you always have some right or some choice to not cause as much harm, so that if you're given the choice whether to shoot someone or that you will be shot, you can always, for example, shoot those people in the legs, for example, or do anything that would free you from the damage. Or even if you get persecuted, then we agree that you will just get a more lenient punishment as you probably did this out of self-defense. There can always be some information available. Notice that the information available that can prove war crimes is going to be completely disregarded and routine in England. Under our side, those cases where information is available and when people clearly committed crimes will be prosecuted, and therefore people who did bad actions will get their punishment. But secondly, why we have the right why we have to guarantee justice is retribution. Because the principal reason why we punish someone is to ensure that people in every base have freedom to not get damaged, and the state should also recognize it. The state should send the signal that it's wrong to cause harm for somebody else. And similarly, it is reasonable for the relatives and the loved ones, for example, child got raped and killed, it's reasonable for them to get the retribution that the criminal has been punished, and for example, got at least the signal that this criminal did something wrong. Notice that the state is the only actor who can provide retribution and who can send the signal that it's not okay to cause violence under any circumstances. We should recognize this right, and hence we should guarantee the justice in every case. No, thank you. And then there's also a point which is the most crucial in this debate, and this is that we are going to ensure long-term stability. So these prone to fall again into conflict of states where conflict has already occurred. For example, we're talking about Serbia, where after 2 years that a conflict ended and nobody were prosecuted. In Srebrenica, for example, the violence broke out again, and the people who were doing these war crimes simply went out and did these crimes again because there was no effective punishment system to convict them, right? So firstly, we will build up the justice system and the strong institution of authority that will send the signal that the conflict is over, it was resolved, and you have to deal with it. So this minimizes the extent to which people can go out on the streets and continue fighting. Before I move on to the next point, I'll take a few items.
What percentage, and I need a number, of these perpetrators do you think you could actually prosecute on your side?
Clearly, this will be very different depending on the conflict and depending on the case. You don't have to give you a number of what we believe that generally it is a clear minority that did active harm engaged in murders or rapes. Then not everybody will be sent to prison. Secondly, most importantly, the only protection from preventing a future conflict is to send the signal that, look, even if you're in the situation of conflict, you cannot do these crimes because otherwise you will get persecuted. This is a very strong disincentive from engaging in rapings and engaging in disproportionate harm. And even if it's self-defense, then you as a soldier, you as a person are much more likely to weigh out whether it really is necessary in order to protect myself. Because people oftentimes in conflict go along with the terror because they fear, and they fear for their own lives. However, now, additionally, there will be the fear and signal that, look, you will get prosecuted if you, for example, rape or live out your trauma on other individuals. Now, this will be prevented. So firstly, it's much harder to engage new conflicts and engage more people in incite violence. But secondly, the new conflicts are going to be less violent because the people are not going to be incited as much and they're going to flee through their actions during conflict. For those reasons that we have the judicial side on our side, and second, the we provides security, please vote for Estonia.
First vote for 8 minutes and 15. Thank the opposition speaker. To continue with opposition case line, I invite second opposition speaker.
For side opposition to win this debate, they had to do one crucial thing. They had to engage with the analysis Serena told you, which explained why it is unlikely on their side of the house you ever get prosecution of the individuals they were so desperate to do so. And that even when you do get prosecution, the people you're likely to prosecute are not the high-ranking officials that do the actual damage, but the vulnerable people that were often coerced into conflict due to being things like child abuse. So they never engage with that analysis on their side of the house. They cannot win this debate. What I'm going to look at in this speech is how we shorten conflicts and decrease overall violence in these conflicts themselves. But before that, let's do some reconstruction, the limited engagement with Zarina's material, and then some rebuttal for the 2 points that we got from Team Estonia. Firstly, on reconstruction. So let's note, we don't actually think they engage with any of the principal analysis that Zarina brought about why we think the prosecutions are a social good, and that as a result, we think that we have an obligation not to do them in this instance. But what did they engage? They engaged with this idea about whether or not we can get prosecutions by saying, look, don't worry, on our side, we don't think the government will do bad things, so it's all right, we know that they won't. Let's note, first of all, no thank you. Let's ignore what Zarina told you when she said that the very act of interviewing or testifying in a court is extremely harmful for any individual that was in this conflict, because they have to do things like relive trauma, because they have to do things like not be able to move on with their lives in the years after a conflict. They never engage with that analysis. But secondly, let's note they have to do this in order to actually be successful on their side of the house. Given that they didn't actually explain to you, no thank you, how on their side of the house they're actually successful at prosecuting these individuals. We think the only way that they can do this is if they do things like try and get information out of victims, if they do things like demand that they give up information, even if victims don't want to do so. But finally, on this idea of reconciliation, because the only thing that they actually said, no thank you, in response to Zarina's entire third argument was, look, we also support truth and reconciliation on our side of the house. Let's note, we've already explained to you why this is necessarily mutually exclusive. Because if you have a truth and reconciliation commission, like the one in South Africa, and you also attempt to prosecute individuals, there is no way that you as an individual who knows you could be prosecuted would go to a Truth and Reconciliation Commission and attempt to explain things like where mass graves are located, because that is literal evidence for your prosecution. They never engaged with that, and we noted the mutual exclusivity in our first speech. No, thank you. But let's engage with their heads. The first thing they told us was about justice. And note here, they say, look, this isn't about, no, here, they also told us that this is not a debate about people like child soldiers, but then, in this argument, they said, look, people always have a choice to engage in this type of violence. What we want to know is which is it. Is it the case that people always have a choice, or is it the case that we actually child soldiers aren't in this debate because oftentimes they were coerced? We actually think people don't necessarily have a choice in all these instances. We think a lot of the time there are blurred lines between victims and perpetrators. We need a response on that. But let's note, they also say, look, we think this sends a signal that it's wrong to do this in society. No, we still have things like Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that send signals that this is something that's bad and needs to be reconciled. But let's also note that we think when prosecution fails, we never get that on their side of the house. So the benefit of the signalling effect had to be explained by why they actually prosecute on their side of the house, and that was something that crucially they were never able to do. No, thank you. But finally, on this idea of civility and conflict, let's just repeat what side opposition said. They said, if you think that you're going to be prosecuted for war crimes, then let's be honest, guys, you just don't commit war crimes. Now, I'm not sure about what's going through someone's mind before they commit a war crime, but I'm pretty sure it's not, I wonder what the way-ups of this could be if I commit this war crime. I wonder if I should take a rational decision as to whether or not to brutally murder this innocent person. We probably don't think that whether or not we're going to get prosecuted is something that comes into consideration at this moment in time. We don't really think that the incentives in individuals weighs in this instance. We're really unsure why it's the case that, like, saying you're going to prosecute someone means that they won't commit ethnic cleansing if that's what they truly believe. Okay, let's look at how we shorten conflict and decrease overall violence in conflicts themselves. Before that, yes, I'll take you on.
Like, justice is not only a social good. How do we recognize that people have human rights unless we prosecute the individuals who have taken these rights away from these people?
Look, we're perfectly happy on our side to recognise that people have human rights. What we told us is that fundamentally, we think that the aim of a prosecution is to secure a social good. We told you in this instance, we do not think prosecuting fulfills that social good. If you can explain to us why you think that actually it does fulfill a social good, then we're perfectly happy to engage on that. Right. Okay, how do we shorten conflicts and decrease overall violence in the conflicts themselves? What do we think currently happens in conflicts that are nearing their end? We think there are two main scenarios. Either we think groups that know they are likely to lose attempt a final big push in their favour. Why do they do this? Because let's know the consequences of losing in things like civil wars are severe. We think A, it's death in that conflict itself, often at the hands of another rebel group or someone within your own group who wants to kill you and then take power, or we think that it's like prosecution if you surrender, or at least the threat of prosecution, which we still think is bad for these individuals. So what we think happens is that these individuals refuse to do things like surrender, and instead they use more violent methods in order to attempt a last big push and avoid that scenario. We would note the instance in when we get things like chemical weapons being used in conflict is precisely at this point. It's when Gaddafi knows that he's probably going to lose, but knows that if he does, the consequences are either prosecution or that he's going to die, and as a result, he uses things like chemical weapons in order to try and desperately reach a victory. Or, no thank you, what do we think the second scenario is? We think the second scenario is that you disappear and attempt to continue to fight a guerrilla conflict. We saw this with Pol Pot in the Cambodian jungles. For the decade after the conflict in Cambodia officially ended, he remained in the jungles fighting a guerrilla conflict against the state of Cambodia because he knew that if he gave up, then he would either die or be prosecuted. What do we think the impacts of these two scenarios are on our side of the house? We think either that firstly that you get protracted conflicts that extend for longer periods of time on our side of the house, but secondly we think you get increased violence in these conflicts, such is the desperation of the individuals that are in them. Oh, what do we get on our side of the house? On our side, they know that if they give up, that they can take an amnesty. We think given that they don't want to die, it's likely that they're going to take this amnesty and surrender, because the consequences of this are A, that you get to end the conflict faster, no thank you, because there is no incentive to prolong a likely loss when you know that you can take this amnesty and survive. But no, there is also less violence, right, which is particularly important in rebuilding these states after the conflict has occurred, because there is no incentive to push for more violence when you can take an amnesty. But even if we don't completely get surrenders, we think you're much more likely to come to the negotiating table on our side of the house. You get more things like FARC in Colombia reaching a settlement. You get more cases of rebel groups being able to integrate into these states post-conflict because they're much more likely to come and negotiate when they know they can take an amnesty. In the long term, we get much more stability for these states, and we're more likely to build towards a reconciliation within post-conflict states. What we told you ultimately in this debate is we want a world that's got more reconciliation and that also secures peace in the long term with these conflicts. We think that peace is the most important thing in this debate. You get that on our side of the house, not on theirs, and that is why I'm so proud of it.
Mr. Speaker, justice is a pillar of peace. Without providing justice in these post-conflict societies, we're never going to be able to reach stability for the people in those states. In my speech, I'm going to firstly make 2 points rebuttal concerning their case. Firstly, talking about reconciliation, and secondly, telling you about the effectiveness of our side. Secondly, 2 put things in rebuilding. Firstly, telling you about the choice that people have or don't have, and secondly, about the point about stability that we brought out. And finally, in extension, I'm going to put you exactly where the social tensions are going to be so much higher under their side, and how vigilante justice is especially going to be on the increase. Starting with the build. First, another point on reconciliation. Now that their argument starts when they say that retribution is a personal issue, thus we can't make broad strokes about what people might want and should rather give them the opportunity to decide. I think that reconciliation is just as personal of an issue, that people should also have the right to choose how they want to reconcile themselves. Seemingly seems to say that retribution is an option that for some doesn't work and therefore we shouldn't provide it to any. I think this is a problem. But notably, seemingly doesn't seem to allow those people to heal who do see retribution in the fact that the person who caused them harm can no longer cause this harm to anyone else. The person who has caused them harm, or for example, has raped you, or has murdered your friend, or has shot you, that person now also gets some type of harm from not being able to live in society and from being isolated. Why this is important that these people get retribution? This is for two reasons. Firstly, I think that retribution is probably most important to those people specifically who were harmed the most. These are the people who are unwilling to simply disregard the harms that were caused to themselves and clearly want this other person to be harmed as well. These are the people who are harmed to the largest extent, and therefore they also want retribution to happen so that the other people who caused them harm will now also be harmed. But secondly, I think that simply more people want retribution. This is the only thing that can actually make people feel like they can truly heal. This is the thing that tells them that your harms were legitimate, and the things that you felt are not going to be simply disregarded by the state. They will recognize the ways that you felt hurt and the ways in which you felt attacked, and for that reason, we're going to harm the perpetrator of those crimes or those abhorrent events in a person's life. This is probably the mindset of most people, because this is finally going to put an end to their suffering. This is the reason why most of these people probably will talk about those harms again, even if they say that this is going to be a personal and emotional trauma for them, because they know that once they have gone through this trauma one more time, they're never going to go through that trauma anymore, because they see that this person has also been harmed, that this person can't do the same thing to you anymore, because they have been isolated from society, and this person has felt the same things that you felt at the hands of the perpetrator of your harms. But moreover, the underpoint about what reconciliation looks like, proposition says that there is going to be more animosity and less information. Firstly, on the point about information, I think that we're more likely to find out about the information on our side if we go into more investigation on things that actually happened, on the sort of crimes that people were committing, and when they were committing them, where they were committing them. Their side is fundamentally going to get less of them, because even if they prove to you that the people have little incentive to talk about their crimes, I don't see what the incentive ever would be under their side. If you already received amnesty and have been basically cleansed from the crimes that you committed, they should prove why people would want to say we're a mass graviest, because I don't think they have that type of motivation. But more importantly, on the point about animosity, they never compare this to our side, where this animosity would still obviously remain due to the fact that you see that the people or the group that caused harm to you is still not being harmed. This causes animosity in you, that these people are getting off way easier than you ever did. On the point about effectiveness, proposition says that we can't go through with these procedures. I have 4 responses. Firstly, I think that the states themselves can conduct some level of persecutions. For example, the Truth and Reconciliation Committee in South Africa, it took about 5 years for them to go through thousands of cases. The reason why this is like an example on our side as well is that this committee didn't only give out amnesty, but also persecuted and imprisoned many people who had done horrible harms. This is the reason why we can also use this example and say that we can go through with some level of investigation. Secondly, they can always look at smaller instances. We think that we support foreign aid as well, etc. And these are always going to be more legitimate decisions than the ones in which no investigation has been done at all, or the state hasn't even tried to make sure whether a person committed a crime or not. Thirdly, the point about greatest criminals. The problem currently is that we are only going after these greatest criminals. Under our side, by at least dealing with the smaller criminals who did some kind of harm, we can get more information about these bigger criminals and therefore have a higher chance of imprisoning them than they ever would under their side. Even if these people don't want to share their knowledge, we always will force them to do so. That's the way persecutions work at the moment. Their analysis about you not wanting to say things that you did is a wash on both sides. But finally, even if we don't imprison or find out information about everyone, we still get more than them, and we are willing to accept this benefit. Moving on to before you go.
Are you more likely to reveal evidence of Max Gray, evidence of your crime, when you know you could be prosecuted, or no, you won't?
I think that you don't want to share information about that anyway, but under our side we force you to do that. Under your side you give that person amnesty and don't force them to give out that information. Show us the incentive that they have under your side. They never truly respond to our point about you personally being complicit in the choices they make. He used the weakest level of police people maybe being child soldiers, which is the most radical example to use against us. It doesn't really say that this is fundamentally or structurally true. Moreover, In their extension, they say that people do bad things as a last resort. People are probably more likely to refrain from doing these things because if they know that an unrighteous win will mean that they are still going to be harmed, and they don't want to do these horrible things like use chemical weapons. If under their side they know that even if they win, they're still going to be harmed due to the horrible things that they've done, they won't want to do these things such as use a chemical weapon. On the point about stability, we think that it's important to note that they don't respond to the strongest part of that argument. The ones with the most extremist rhetoric are still going to remain inside that country, are still going to be able to influence the society and politics of that nation, and this extreme rhetoric is going to continue. This paves the way for more social tensions, which I'm going to further prove in my extension to which I'm moving on to now, about vigilante justice. I think that the assumption of this argument is that retribution fundamentally is not given under their side to people. Even if they prove that some people can personally reconcile, they notice that they don't give a wide level of retribution in which people understand that the criminals who harmed them and caused them great harm are also in some ways paying for that. This means that people never get a true sense of justice and fundamentally feel like the state didn't create them a sense of justice, meaning that people will want to create it themselves. This creates a higher level of polarization amongst the two groups that they in their first speakers say always exist in these post-conflict societies. The most extreme examples that are going to happen is the fact that people feel like their perpetrators got off too easy. They might cause those people extreme physical damage, or for example, kill those people. This happens due to the fact that they think that this is the harm those people should have felt, but they saw that none of those outcomes actually came true. But even if that's not likely, they're still more likely to go into the communities of the ones that harmed them, but from which all of the criminals received simply amnesty. They're going to go to those communities to harm people there, to say bad things about them, to throw stones at their house, to show that they still have animosity towards them, and that they still believe that the people who perpetrated some kind of harm should have felt clearer harms themselves. In these instances, conflict is always more likely to reappear due to the fact that you still feel a huge amount of tension, that these two groups have never been divided because none of those two groups have truly felt a high level of harm enough for the other group to say that I'm now fine and I'm not going to want to harm that group anymore. There is a bigger amount of people going into these new conflicts as well because they feel like they have to repay the justice that the state never served, that I have to repay the fact that my brother never got justice after he was murdered. These new conflicts are going to be much bigger than the ones at the moment because people who previously didn't enjoy them are now going to go into those conflicts to repay someone else's debt. For these reasons, of course.
First vote for minutes and 18. Now, speech. Now, I think I'll come to that third option details.
I think the reason why side opposition found it so difficult to engage with the true comparative in this debate was because they could not accept that post-conflict societies do not consist of a neat line between a minority of perpetrators and a majority of victims into which the state can easily categorize an entire population. Because we were the only side that told you about the messiness of sectarianism, of the changing of hands of territories between different factions, meaning that at one point you could be a victim and subsequently a perpetrator. We were the only team that brought you a realistic characterization of what these societies look like and what they need. I'm going to look at two questions. Firstly, is it legitimate for us not to punish these individuals? And secondly, what is the negative effect of these prosecutions in a world without amnesties on rebuilding within post-conflict societies? Firstly, I'd just like to note that the 2 minutes of analysis that our second speaker brought you on why amnesties change the incentives and antagonists in conflict and make them more willing to surrender to peace arrangements so that settlements can be reached more quickly received absolutely no response from the last speaker. A massive impact on the way in which these societies are able to rebuild. A massive impact on the scale and extent of violence. They never engage with it. It is too late for them to deal with it in the op block. They should lose this debate on that criteria alone. Let's look at the first original question, though, of whether or not it is legitimate to prosecute these individuals. We've told you to absolutely no response from side opposition that prosecution is a mechanism in order to protect the public interest and not a good in and of itself. Note that there was never any engagement with this, but they tried to offer you a counter-characterization of what prosecution should be. The first thing they told you is that the condition of war does not remove criminal guilt. Note that we think that this was a disingenuous argument for them to make, because we think that there is a sense in which war is probably a separate context to peace. Because whereas in peacetime, there isn't a strong externality or harm associated with these prosecutions, rather, when they come about immediately post-conflict, they have the power, as our first and second speaker told you, to reignite and exacerbate conflict. We think that the context of war is one that demands that the only moral imperative should be to ensure that war ends. The only moral imperative should be to ensure stability. That was inadequate. But then they told us, kind of bizarrely, that individuals have a choice in whether they cause harm or the extent of harm that they cause, because they can blow off the legs of a civilian instead. Note that this is still a war crime, and therefore utterly uncomparative in this debate. We don't think it's sufficient for them to be like, a smaller war crime might be less bad. We just think that's fundamentally non-responsive. But also they never dealt with the material we gave you on how these individuals are actively coerced and indoctrinated, threatened and brutalized by faction groups. 37% of men in Sierra Leone were child soldiers in the conflict. It's simply not good enough for them to tell us that these individuals have a choice when we've given you structural reasons that they don't. This needs to move beyond an assertion, but because they only have the op block left, it is too late for it to do so. Then they told us people deserve the state affirming their trauma through the provision of retribution. Note that this is an entirely contingent principle, and it is contingent on them proving that in the majority of instances these prosecutions are successful. Given they never engaged with any of the structural reasons Zarina gave you, why these individuals are often able to escape justice, why it's difficult for evidence to be forthcoming, they probably don't achieve that. But let's look at their best case scenario where they do get evidence. Do they genuinely believe that the best affirmation of your trauma is as a Cambodian child to have interrogation techniques used by the ICC on you in order to get information out of you for a war tribunal that occurs in The Hague thousands of miles away that will have no meaning for your life? By contrast, we can offer truth and reconciliation healing processes within these people's communities that actually make their quality of life better, that actually help them move on from conflict. But then they tell us people need retribution in order to reconcile, and that those harmed to the largest extent want retribution. We think ultimately, more than anything else, people in these societies want peace, they want stability, and they want to be able to coexist with their neighbours. Until they're able to prove that this abstract good of retribution is more important than those things to these individuals, they cannot take this debate. Let's look at the second question of what the effect of pursuing these prosecutions is on post-conflict societies in terms of their ability to rebuild. No, thank you. Note firstly that we gave you an incredibly nuanced characterization of the broadly two types of states that exist in this area. They never engage with the first kind of state, one in which we think there are long waits before these tribunals happen, and where they are least likely to be successful. And note, given we told you this is actually the majority of cases after, say, the Yugoslav war in Bosnia, for instance, it is incredibly problematic that they failed to do so. But the only ground they did engage on was states where prosecutions happen immediately after conflict. So as we're feeling generous, we'll focus on that, right? We told you that in those states, these prosecution processes damage rebuilding efforts, they waste resources, and don't provide information to victims. What did we hear in response? They firstly told us that they can support truth and reconciliation processes in addition to prosecution. No, they can't. Why? Because people then risk prosecution themselves by attending these healing processes. Because by arriving at a truth and reconciliation committee or at a Catholic court and saying, I was complicit in war crimes, you expose yourself to prosecution. Particularly in a climate where we think states are likely to be struggling to find evidence, these individuals open themselves up to the risk of prosecution. Those can never happen. But also note that their whole concept of prosecution and retribution is in direct contravention of the underlying doctrine of these kind of processes. We think it's impossible, without contradicting and counteracting the message of these processes, to have prosecution coexist with them. Then they told us states want peace, therefore they have a disincentive to make these bad. Actually, we think the fact states want peace means that they have an incentive to do things like scapegoat individuals from the losing side, or scapegoat ordinary people, in order to create this superficial impression of good results from these prosecutions, rather than meaningful justice and prosecution of important war criminals. And they tell us most people are civilians, therefore they did not commit war crimes, and therefore we can focus on the few that did. Unfortunately, we think they never engaged with the horrific complexity of states in which children are ripped from their homes and given guns. Until they do so, they cannot take this debate. Then, most bizarrely of all, they told us individuals who are coerced can claim self-defense in these instances. Firstly, Let's note how much less effective this makes the trial mechanisms they talk about when incredibly complex defences come into play. Given Team Estonia themselves struggle to prove which individuals were coerced in this debate, probably courts are also going to struggle to establish it, right? But then they told us these individuals will be more leniently punished. Note that putting the word lenient before punishment doesn't mean that they're not imprisoning 80% of the Rwandan population on their side of the house. But then they told us investigations can only happen on their side. No, Truth and Reconciliation Committees also have investigations. But finally, on long-term conflict, they told us two broad things here. Firstly, that there's a signalling effect of these prosecutions, indicating to people the war is over. We think actually, what's much more likely is that groups react violently against them when they're consistently being re-traumatized before, and when they are often framed as animosity between the pre-existing sectarian groups. Then they told us this is a disincentive against engaging in war crimes. Note that this directly clashes with Luke's material, and there was no engagement here. But given we've shown you why the individuals who orchestrate the crimes are unlikely to be prosecuted on their side of the house, even though they didn't respond to Luke's response, we can still prove them wrong twice on that issue. Finally, very briefly on this shift in second, they told us they're now only going to deal with smaller criminals. Note that they concede all the harms on their side of the house, but also that by their own characterizations, these individuals deserve less. We think that putting a scared 18-year-old boy in front of the war tribunal will never constitute justice and will never bring about reconciliation. Proud to propose.
And now let's move on to our speech to the opposition team.
Honourable judges, note that Team England does not engage with our case at its best. The fact that every single criminal we manage to prosecute brings greater stability to communities and provides retribution to every single person that they were harmed. We think it is problematic that their third speaker didn't respond to the fact of how we provide stability, the fact that the way in which we able to make stable communities is to not have neighbours together who have, for example, killed each other's family members. This is important, and this is important because even in characterization, the fact that we have to provide social good, we think that we have already done it. We also think that, of course, there is some sort of overlap between victims and perpetrators, but under our side, perpetrators also have the right to retribution, and victims can still be liable for their actions. We think that our side actually has a much more nuanced characterization than Team England. Three things that I want to talk about in my speech. First, I'm going to go over the technicalities of whether we can even have these trials, which their first speaker dropped. Secondly, I'm going to look at why retribution is very important and why the point of a justice system is not only to provide social good. Thirdly, I'm going to look at how by seeking prosecution we can actually provide much more stable communities, and we are not allowing Gaddafi to use extreme weapons. But first of all, the technicalities. They say that trials take a lot of time, for example, in that in some cases even more than 30 years. And if we use the ICC, then this is an illegitimate choice to people. But we think that the problem is that what the second speaker already outlined is that they don't really compare it with their own material. The fact that even if some people don't see the judgments to be fair due to ICC involvement, then it is more likely that absolving people completely of crimes is going to agitate a larger part of the population, because this is their characterization of the debate, that a huge part of the population has been complicit in some sorts of crimes, which means that if a huge part of the population is now completely absolved, that someone who for example, raped someone else completely goes free, then we think that this is much larger in a much larger group. No, thank you, who is going to not really agree with this overall statement. We think that every single person knows that murder and rape is wrong, and we think the prosecution is going to seem legitimate for a larger amount of people than a world where, for example, murder is completely war-free. Because this was the overall impact that they gave. We don't think this really applies to us. No, thank you. Quickly moving forward, why is retribution very important in this debate? They said that there is no intrinsic value of prosecution and it is only to provide a social good. Two responses. Firstly, people have a right to retribution. They say that they're perfectly happy to recognise their rights, but they obviously don't. In actions, they don't. The state is the only agent who has the power to tangibly recognise and enact actions based on the fact that people have immutable rights that need to be protected. The fact that people have a right to live, the fact that people have a right not to be raped. They are not recognising it, no thank you, because they're not prosecuting anyone who has actually committed this crime. The fact that they say that people have to live through trauma in court is obviously weaker than our analysis, as under their side, victims know that their rapists live free with no problems in their lives. This is obviously much a larger trauma than the fact that people have to go to court. But secondly, we think that a reason enough to actually prosecute these people is that these people are always complicit in their actions. The rebuttal that they give is that, what about child soldiers? Well, maybe really for children, but adults make a choice. And I think that in this debate we should be talking about the majority, not a convenient minority that proposition wants to talk about child soldiers. Adults have a decision to engage in violence or not. Every war has people that do not commit war crimes, and we think that most people actually don't. So we think that people have a decision whether they want to engage in war crimes or not. No, thank you. And note that even at our worst, we still win this clash, as even in instances of self-defense, as we have talked about before, we say that defense has to be proportional. The fact that they say that blowing up legs is still a war crime is something that we obviously actually agree with, but we obviously also take this into account when prosecuting, and we will significantly minimize sentences based on the fact of how proportional that self-defense was, which means that there isn't any, overall, we're still providing very honest retribution to people, and we take into account how complicit people in their actions were and how much of a right they had to that self-defense. We think that this is the norm in courts, and they can't say that courts have no way of understanding whether someone actually made an action in self-defense. Now, is there a few?
Question.
Yes.
On which side of the house do you get more vigilante justice? When prosecutions rife with animosity, targeting everyone, fail, or when reconciliation processes bring about forgiveness and peaceful coexistence?
Yeah, got it. Thank you for that introduction to my third point of clash, which is stability. First of all, they say that the first point that I want to deal with is that they say that states can't prosecute the greatest criminals, for example, as they have a lot of support. We think that it is obviously always in the interest of the state to go after these criminals, but also the important thing to take into account is that when we prosecute, it is always going to be an incentive for the low-level criminals, which we already proved how we can prosecute them. It's always going to be the incentive for the low-level criminals to come out with information to minimize their sentence. No, thank you. Also, always a standard procedure in legal systems that coming out with information about larger criminals is going to minimize your sentence. This is an incentive of how we actually can prosecute greater criminals. There is no incentive on side proposition. This also means that this also applies in case of child rapes. Why would someone voluntarily admit that they have been part of such an action as they describe if they actually gain nothing out of it? They don't prove that this incentive exists under their side, which means that they didn't win this clash. Second point. They say that Gaddafi wants to use extreme weapons, for example, and others want to continue guerrilla warfare under our side. But they don't take into account that under their side, Gaddafi will have no reason not to use these extreme weapons. Under us, at least there is a risk of personal harm, which means it is much more likely that Gaddafi doesn't want to use these weapons, as Gaddafi has to make that calculation where, no thank you, in cases where he doesn't win, he will be prosecuted and he will have to face charges. Under their side, he will not have to face charges, so he has no incentive to not actually use this. Last point, stability. What are we actually doing? They are isolating, we in opposition are isolating individuals who are the most aggressive and prone to commit communal violence. They are not. Two things that happens under this. Firstly, in these communities, often these conflicts are local, within a village or between close villages. This is very important to understand, because proposition, no thank you, is keeping people together who have caused huge harm to one another. This means that often new violence happens. Often new violence also happens because of vigilante justice, in cases where the state state doesn't actually prosecute these individuals. But secondly, what also happens is that extremist individuals, groups and networks are sustained in that state. That means that the rhetoric of these groups is sustained. The reasons why conflict happened in the first place, all of these people are sustained, which means that they can also often call to violence even after conflicts have ended because they weren't on the winning side, but we keep them in society. These people are going to be influencing political systems in these states that already are very weak. This leads to two main impacts, or like a very important impact. That firstly, we allow lots of small conflicts to occur on a smaller scale, but these can spiral into much larger scale conflicts. Because it is always going to be in the interest of the losing side or extremists to want to bring conflict back, and will spin all of these small conflicts to justify new wars, justify new conflicts, which means that in the end we're not providing any sort of stability. Even in the practicalities, we need to make sure that the communities we are creating actually have people that are not going to start violence again, that are not going to use rhetoric, that is also going to incite violence in these communities that have already had to deal with it, and now, and like in instances where we don't have any sort of protection. Also, the analysis we brought in our first speech, that now in these new conflicts, it is much more likely these people will be even more violent because they will have no sort of problems with the justice system, even if they lose again. For all of these reasons, please vote for Team Estonia. Thank you very much.
Delegitimizing what has been done to the victim will not result in forgiveness to your neighbour or stable society, the way that Team England wants to characterise. Three things in my speech which prove why we're wrong. Firstly, I want to look at what are these societies like and why they can't simply frame us out with a characterization as third problems to say. Secondly, I want to look at the issue of retribution and why we have been able to show to you that more people will be able to receive or achieve reconciliation on our side. And thirdly, quickly touch on the point of effectiveness with which they once again have simply been trying to tell us that we can't do it. Firstly, what are these societies like? Proposition gives us a description that these societies are messy. People can be victims and perpetrators, or both at the same time. We can agree with this. This, however, is not a reason why we should not try and look for justice. The easiest response is that we will simply look at both of these things. We will look at the fact that people have been perpetrators and harm on the cause so that they have been perpetrators to some. The fact that you've been victimized by others doesn't mean that you yourself haven't caused harm. But moreover, they try to characterize the ICC as the only option that we can ever protect under our side. We consistently haven't understood why and have been able to prove to you that there are other options. The fact that we have these states have some level of own justice systems that we can use at least in some instances, but the fact that these states that we have seen in instances in which the states have been able to form new justice systems, such as the TRC in South Africa, which notably had authority because most people were harmed and weren't just given amnesty, which is what they would like to say. Truth and Reconciliations Committee is an example on our side for which we use this notion of trying to understand what people have done in order to persecute them in instances where we felt it was necessary, which was the majority of cases in that country. So therefore, I think we've been proven to you that they constantly characterize or describe us out of this debate. We are still very much in it. But secondly, on this idea of retribution, I think that what these people want is, the proposition tells you that what these people want is just peace and getting along with your neighbours. I think that this is a mindset that is more neo-colonial than the ICC's behaviour, which they talk about in their first speech. I want them to tell that to the people in Rwanda, where another tribe seek to murder your whole community. The underlying logic in all of our three speeches has been that if the state doesn't harm the perpetrator, the victim's harms are inherently delegitimized, and the causes of the perpetrator's actions are given legitimacy. This is the mindset that they are giving into the heads of the victims in those post-conflict societies, telling to them that their harms are not necessary enough or not credible enough to harm that person who has caused those harms to that victim. We think that this is an attack on those people's being, and this won't be reconciled simply because it would be nice if everyone got along in those societies, which obviously is true, but they simply don't prove to us how they are actually going to get to that position. But moreover, we gave an argument about how this leads to increased social tensions. Once we're never able to fix those gaps and barriers between these two groups that are going to exist in these societies, then these groups are never going to be able to get along better, or never going to be able to actually reconcile. They can't simply respond to this with a POI to our third speaker, because they can't have to prove why they have these processes of forgiveness that they mentioned in the POI, but haven't been able to do so. Finally, on the point about effectiveness. Firstly, I think that we have been able to show to you how to at least some extent we can do some things. We've already mentioned how these states themselves and some kind of justice systems